Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our Tech Tuesday webinars, which gives us a chance to go into some more depth behind a particular technology, or in this case, a capability. So today's a little bit different in that we're not going to be talking about a product or a family of products. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the capabilities that a manufacturer like EDAC has to cater for customer requirements. As per our previous presentations, we won't be taking questions at the end, but if you do have some questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. We will make sure that we get back to you either directly if you have a specific question, or when the video gets posted to YouTube, that we can include some of the answers to questions that get asked. So with that in mind, let's start talking about custom connectors. And what we're going to do is we're going to split this down into 2 or 3 sections. We're going to talk about why customization is important and why it is even required. We're going to talk a little bit about what they actually are, because there's some misconceptions, some confusion with some customers about what a custom connector actually might be. We're going to talk a little bit about how they're made, because that's quite important in terms of what customization can be provided for an engineer, for a customer. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why they're still important, and a few things that customers need to know when they're thinking about whether or not they need something that's a little bit special. So the first question that we've got to answer is why custom connectors are still in existence, why they're still important. The connector industry is something like 140 years old, and there are literally millions of different part numbers available for all kinds of connector. And so the first question could be, well, with so much choice available and such a broad industry, why are custom connectors actually still required? Well, the fact is that there are so many applications out there for connectors that sometimes what's available from a standard catalog that a standard manufacturer might provide is required. You need something that's going to be a little bit custom, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of the reasons why you might choose those. But one of the things that we need to talk about is the perception behind custom connectors. If you say to somebody that you're going to design something special just for them, there are usually 2 or 3 concerns. One is, how much is it going to cost? Surely this is a more expensive solution. One is, well, how long am I going to have to wait? Because this surely must take a long amount of time. And thirdly, am I going to have to order millions to justify creating a bespoke, special design? Well, the first thing to say is that a lot of the custom connectors that are in existence generally start off as a standard product underneath. And in fact, if you mirror that, you might be surprised to learn how many standard products that appear in a manufacturer's catalog originally started out as some kind of special solution. So special and custom products and standard products are far closer than maybe some customers might think to begin with. And we then come on to the question of what actually makes a custom connector, what can be changed. Now, this is an image that we've used previously when we were talking about card edge connectors. I used this image to talk about all of the different aspects of what is effectively quite a simple connector and all of the different things that we can change. And when it comes to making a custom connector, you might be surprised to learn how easy it is to change some of these aspects to make a product that is specific for you or for your customer. And we're going to break it down into different categories, because there are some products or some elements of the design that can be changed very, very easily and surprisingly easily and have an effect. So we're going to break these down into the simple changes. So some of these aspects of this connector are kind of baked into the overall design, but some can be changed quickly. So the first thing that we can change is the number of contacts. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that we shorten or lengthen the connector, but we can actually leave contacts out. It's interesting to remember that contacts within a connector are gold plated. Gold is expensive and actually constitutes one of the greatest costs of making some types of connector. So if you can leave a contact out because it's simply not required for your design, you're saving money. You're actually reducing the cost of the connector. And that's very simple to do. In the manufacturing process, if you decide that of, say, 20 contacts, that 3 of them are not required for your design, they can be left out and the overall cost of the connector can be reduced. That's a very simple change to make. There are some other changes that can be made depending upon the design of the connector. In terms of the card edge, the EDAC card edge types, we have a series of polarizing keys that can be inserted very easily that make the connector unique to your application. There are other aspects that we can talk about in terms of accessories that go with them. D-subs are a very good example. So many D-sub connectors have so many different options when it comes to mounting accessories, back shells. Sometimes these are supplied as separate components, but we could simply customize a product by creating a part number that includes all of those accessories. So there are some changes that can be made incredibly easily that will either reduce cost or possibly reduce the logistical needs, the supply needs that a customer has. They can order fewer part numbers by creating a kit. Some of these changes are so easy to make and don't actually take much in the way of extra time and may actually save some money. And this is an element of the customization, the polarizing keys. Again, we've used this image previously, but the white parts here you can see are polarizing keys that are inserted into the card edge that stop the wrong card being inserted into this connector. This is ideal, and this is one of the reasons we'll come on to later about why people might choose custom. Sometimes, as much as standardized connectors are useful, sometimes customers need their connector to be unique. It could be to prevent mismating. It could be for a safety reason to ensure that the wrong component does not get mounted into the wrong connector. So there's all sorts of reasons why these might be a useful tool, and they're very simple and easy to implement. Then we go on to some of the actions that take a little bit more effort in terms of creating the connector that you might need. Things like the tail length on contacts. These can be changed relatively easily. They do require a change, maybe a tool or machine, but they're set relatively simple to do. The bend dimensions within those tails can be made, and contact plating. Now that's one of the big ones. Contact plating is easy to change simply because the process that in which contacts are plated is time dependent. If you need more contact plating, if you need more gold on contact, it's a case of either plating it for a longer time or putting the contact through the process twice. This is an easy change to make that doesn't actually require much in the way of tooling or a new design. And contact plating has an impact on the performance of your connector. It could extend the life. It may even improve the electrical characteristics. So making a custom connector using nothing more than a contact plating actually allows you to tune your connector to a specific application. There's also simple elements like how the connector is marked. This connector here, for example, has the word EDAC written on it, but with the latest in terms of laser printing and other marking technologies, a connector can be easily marked to match the application required by the customer. These are all changes that are actually relatively easy to implement, may take a little bit extra time, but actually create something that can be very useful for a customer. Then we come on to say some of the more advanced technologies that we need to change. Things like the raw materials, the actual material of which the connector housing is made, maybe even the contact plate, the contact base metal can be changed. Things like insulator color and contact type that goes within the connector. These are a little bit more complex in terms of the changes that are being made. Again, tail bend can be complex. And the raw materials of the contact, as I mentioned. So these are changes that are, again, still relatively easy, but may take a little bit more in terms of design. And then we come on to what most people think of as potentially a brand new contact or connector design. And these are the things that will require changes in tooling. So things like the molding of the connector. If we need a new mold tool to increase row spacing, increase the overall length, change the contact pitch, these are elements of the design that actually require additional tooling, and there is a cost involved in that. So we mustn't blind ourselves. I'm saying that custom connectors are easy, and in lots of cases they are, but sometimes the changes made require just that little bit more engineering time and effort. So a new tool, a new mold tool, a new machining program, things like that can be implemented, but there are some implications that go along with that. And to get a better idea of what is possible within a custom connector, we just need to briefly talk about how the different elements within a connector are made, because some of these changes might affect just one component in an overall connector. All the rest can be standard. We need to change one part, but we need to understand the implications of what the change will take. So plating, we've talked about earlier, it's actually a relatively easy change to make. We can quite quickly create a contact that has less plating or more plating. There are often options to change the plating material. So most connectors use gold plated contacts, but tin can be used sometimes for a cheaper, lower cost option. And in certain high power applications, sometimes customers will want silver to provide extra conductivity within the connector design. But plating doesn't require any new additional tooling. It's a process. And so from a point of view of making something that's a little bit different, a process may be easier to change than creating new engineering tools. The next step up is a machined contact. Now, many of the D subs that you might find in industry use machined contacts as opposed to stamped and formed contacts, which we'll come to in a minute. Machine contacts are created individually, one at a time, using generally a computer numeric control program nowadays. It's all digitally controlled, and the CNC machine will take the model from 3D CAD design and convert it into the instructions for the CNC machine. And so creating a new machined part is actually relatively easy as well, because it's a computer program, it's a software change. As long as the changes in length can be accommodated within the machine, as long as changes in diameter can be accommodated, the change to a machined contact actually is relatively low. So the cost implication is quite small. There will be some engineering required because of the new computer program, but in terms of hardware, not much needs to change. Now, this is where we start to come on to the requirements for new mold tooling and later on we'll talk about stamped and formed. This is where a new tool is required. Molding requires a bespoke, custom-made tool to allow the molding to be created. Now, many connectors use a standard mold tool, and we can use existing technology to create a connector. If no change is required to the housing, we can use an existing housing molding. But if you need something a little bit different, then we need to go down the route of creating a new mold tool, and there will be cost and time implications within that. But I think it's important to reiterate that there are a large number of changes that you can make that don't need to go quite as far down the engineering route as this. Sure, a new mold tooling is available. We can always make one, but sometimes you might not need it. Custom is easier than you might think. And that's one of the key messages I'd like you to leave today's webinar with, is that customization is actually far easier, potentially cheaper than you might fear, and might be quicker than you might think. But mold tooling is one of those aspects where new machines, new tools are required. And the same is true of the stamping process. So we've talked about machined contacts, but stamped and formed contacts, which are ideal for mass production, require a stamping die. And these contacts are generally created in a progressive process. Starting with a flat sheet of metal, the shape will be cut. Then that shape will start to be formed into a three-dimensional shape that will be suitable for use in a connector. And if you want something a little bit different, then a new stamp will be required. A new die set for the stamping machine will be required. And again, it's one of those aspects where there will be an element of engineering cost, there will be an element of extra time and some communication with the designers. But as I say, this is almost the last step. There are so many other changes that we could make before we get to this part of the design. Now, we've talked about what custom is and some of the changes that we can make, and hopefully I've given you an idea of how some of those components are made, which gives you an idea of how easy some of those changes can be, or maybe how much extra information you need to think about if you want to go down the route of, say, a new mold tool. The question for many customers is, why should I go down the route of choosing something that isn't in the catalogue? Surely choosing from the catalogue is a better idea for me. Well, there are reasons why customers can go down this custom route and find it beneficial. Well, the first is potentially to reduce complexity. So this is just an image of a cable harness within a vehicle. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 connectors within this picture. Every one of those connectors requires time. Every one of those connectors requires effort to terminate. What if a customer could combine some of the features in multiple connectors into one? And that would reduce all sorts of aspects of the production process. Only one connector needs to be terminated. When it comes to final assembly, only one connector needs to be mated when, in this case, the vehicle gets put together. This reduction in complexity, whilst there may be a cost involved in creating a custom connector, the benefits come further downstream when it comes time to actually assemble these connectors. And that can be very powerful when we're talking about large quantity production, or anything where potentially there is space limitations within the vehicle or whatever other equipment we're making, and you can create something that reduces the complexity of your design. That in its turn also has an impact in cost. The time it takes to assemble a connector, the time it takes to terminate a connector, is a hidden cost when it comes to buying these products. And by reducing the complexity of that connector, we can reduce the cost. And we've also talked about the idea of potentially creating a connector with fewer contacts, for example. So we're reducing the raw materials we're using. We're reducing the amount of gold that goes into this connector. So strangely, a custom connector might actually save the customer some money. And that's the important thing to think about, both in terms of reduced complexity of the component itself, the connector itself, and in whole life costs. We must always remember, buying the connector and buying the contacts is just the first step of the process. Connectors join things, connectors connect to other things, and that process takes time and takes money. There are some times where the size and capability of a connector that is available to the general market simply isn't going to do the job. With an increased effort towards miniaturization across a whole range of industry, here we have a future soldier application where the soldier in the field is carrying quite a remarkable amount of technology on their person. We need to keep the lightweight and small size of those technologies, of those pieces of equipment, but we need to increase their capabilities. And sometimes the connectors that join them simply cannot do the job. And so we do need something that is genuinely different. It's smaller, it's lighter, it has extra pins, it might have fewer pins, but we need to have something that is very much special to a particular design, and you can't compromise by choosing maybe a slightly bigger connector. Sometimes that just won't do, and we need something special. And this, I think, is where many customers have in their minds the idea of a custom connector. This is the standard perception. It is a choice. It is something that some customers need. And if there is the need to do that, then absolutely we can help. But there are other times where you might not need to go down that route. I did also talk earlier about safety and security, about genuinely the need to make a connector different. There are times where plugging the wrong connector into the wrong socket has an impact that could include loss of life or danger to life and limb. And these two applications are just examples of that. The medical application, where you cannot afford for a piece of equipment to be plugged into the wrong socket, where you have a defense or an aviation type situation where critical components need to be ensured that they plug into the right place. By creating a customized connector with features that are absolutely unique, you are ensuring that a customer, that a user, an end user cannot plug the connector into the wrong place. And there are times where that simply cannot be compromised. You need that safety and security. And this may happen more and more in the future, where we sometimes talk about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity absolutely has an online aspect where we need to provide software firewalls, for example. But cybersecurity also has a physical aspect to it. If an unattended connector port can be accessed by someone who shouldn't be there, then there is a way of accessing your system physically that doesn't require firewalls because you've already bypassed them. By using a unique connector, you are potentially creating a more secure system. So safety and security is an important aspect for customers to think about. Now, when we just talk about a few things that your customer or your engineer needs to think about when they are considering some of the things that they want to look at in a connector, there are a few things they need to understand. The first is that there is a potential that they might cost a bit more. And so we need to understand, we need to communicate with them at the very earliest step exactly what those costs might be and how much cost the customer can withstand, because that will have an impact on the design that gets created. Now, timescales are also an issue because certainly to begin with, there will be a bit of communication back and forth with the end user as the design becomes refined. Sometimes customers have even the sketchiest ideas of what they're actually after. It might just be, well, I want something like this, but I want some extra pins. An element of communication happens at the beginning of that process. That takes time. And then if extra designs need to be created, there will be a toing and froing communication that will take up time. Finally, if we then come to the need to create a new mold tool, a new stamping tool, there is a time element in that. So sometimes these things can take a little longer. But I think one of the things we'll come to in a minute is why dealing with a company like EDAC actually reduces the impact of that. We do need to understand what the total requirements are. I would love to say that we could create a custom connector for one piece. Realistically, that's not the case. There will be an expectation that there is a certain element of volume that will provide an economy of scale when you're creating something new. But again, you might find it surprising how low that requirement might be. And finally, which comes on to where EDAC comes into this picture, is finding a partner who can help with that. There are connector companies in the world, very large ones, who can do custom connectors, but they often require huge minimum order quantities. They might wait a long time to create this new special connector. And when it comes to that communication that I mentioned earlier, there is nothing quite like having direct access to the people who will be designing your connector. And that's one of the things that a company like EDAC can provide. We can put you directly in contact with the engineer. We can provide that instant feedback that gives you the assurance that what you've got on paper is what finally turns up. And that's an important aspect. Creating a custom connector requires a partner. And it's important that we choose a partner that's really going to be able to help when the time comes to create that product. So just to summarize, these are some of the key things that I really would like you to leave today with. One is that custom is still relevant. Despite the size of the market, despite the number of options that are available, there will always be a need for a custom or a special product for a particular application. And for all the reasons that we've talked about, whether it's cost, whether it's simplicity and complexity, whether it's safety and security, there's always going to be something that comes up that says, I can't quite find the connector I need. Here's a solution that takes a little bit of effort. But that process is not as scary. It's not as daunting as you might first think. Quantities, when you talk to the right partner, the number that you need to buy might be lower than you think. The cost might be lower than you think. The timescales might be lower than you think. And in fact, working with the right partner makes the whole process that little bit easier. So that's the key thing at the end there is you need a manufacturer who is going to be able to support that process, not just in terms of what they can physically make, but in terms of the support that the customer gets. So whether that's yourself, whether that's your customer, whether that's an engineering customer you're selling to, That direct support is vital to ensure that they are confident in what they are going to receive. So just to summarize at the end, we've talked about custom, but I have mentioned that an awful lot of custom connectors, a lot of special connectors, are based upon existing technologies. There are so many types that are simple variations on something that seems very, very familiar already. And so one of the joys of working with EDAC MH is that there is an enormous product range upon which you can base those things that you need to be different. And we've shown this image part in the past Tech Tuesdays as well. It shows the range of different technologies that EDAC can provide, from card edge and rack and panel connectors to wire-to-wire, wire-to-board types. So with this as a foundation, as a basis of your custom design, it gives a huge variety of places to start. So when all of a sudden you need something that's a little bit different, you're already talking to somebody who's got this huge range of different connector types that's going to be able to help out. And we've shown this slide as well. This just breaks down some of the product range into its relevant components. And many of these will be familiar to you: D-subs, card edge, wire-to-wire, wire-to-board, rack and panel connectors, and then some of the more special designs, the magnetic pogo type connectors, the push-pulls. Some of these are actually really easy to modify and to create something that's unique to the customer. So this is the foundation, this is the basis upon which you can create your custom products. Now, if you have any questions, now whether it's about the standard product, whether it's about how easy it's going to be to create something a little bit different, these are your contacts. We've got the European contacts, we've got our global distribution contacts. Please use these numbers, reach out to your people within EDAC, and they're going to be able to help you start that process, even if it's just a case of finding what you can't find in the catalogue. But then if it's a case of creating something a little bit different, these people will absolutely be able to start that process for you and make it as painless as possible. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully this has given you an idea of what the capabilities of EDAC might be when we compare with some of the things we've talked about in the past, which is what the products can do. So that's one of the key messages behind working with a partner. It's not just about what we can make, it's about the capabilities we bring to that manufacturing process. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat or reach out to your contacts, and we will absolutely get back to you and help you with that. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again soon.